Hello, listeners, and welcome back to our podcast. Before we start today's interview, I wanted to remind you we're having our annual meeting in Las Vegas September the 1st through the 5th called Ortho on the Strip. We would love to see you there. Please sign up and register as the spots are going quickly. Welcome to the orthoPAC podcast with your hosts Sam Dyer, Chuck Dowell, and Miles Gilbreth. Please join us as we attempt to fill in the gaps between education, current events, and real-world practice. Welcome back, listeners. Today we continue our conversation with Kristin Burton regarding personal finance, retirement, and other financial strategies.
The general principle I've seen is whoever has the highest viewpoint or the longest duration viewpoint of money tends to win. If you actually think about, like, what is my annual cost of X for everything that you encounter, I think you'll come out ahead financially way further than most.
And I want to throw in personally, I avoid contracts like the plague. Now, in some things, if you're buying a house, you got to buy a car, things you have to do. But if it's not a have to, I mean, like cable, like, Netflix, like Amazon, like grocery service, the lawn service, everything. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, there's a reason the whole industry has cropped up of helping people find and to discontinue their subscriptions. It's so easy to kind of sign yourself away into really a lot of monthly expense just by signing up for those little things. So the fact that you hesitate is obviously a huge win overall. But most of them you can get out of relatively easily. So I would say you really have to be cautious of what the total cost outflow is. But entering into some of those, some exceptions, of course, some are harder to get rid of than others. But like signing up for Netflix tends to be a relatively, low cost way to get out. Signing up for a timeshare probably involves an attorney to exit yourself out of that agreement. So keeping that in mind. But I think honestly, the big shift you have to make when you're thinking about those little expenses of like, oh, Netflix, or I'm going to sign up for the car wash membership or whatever that is actually shifting to looking at annual cost. Even though they always incentivize to pay on a subscription model versus pay lump sum, if that is an option, they incentivize you to pay lump sum, typically like a very small amount. They benefit more from you being, monthly recurring revenue. And so if you were to ask me like, hey, what would you think about signing up for this, even a monthly car payment or a monthly daycare contract or something? My first thought is, what is the annual cost? What is the percent of an annual income? And if you look at your financial life that way, you can pretty easily say, oh, wow, my total annual mortgage is this. My total annual tax burden is this. My total annual childcare costs are this. My total annual travel budget is this. Total student loan annual payment is this. And you can see how the overhead you choose, the percent of income it takes, and then how that all adds up pretty quickly. I think if you look at that view of money, of really like, what's this annual expense to me, no matter how you decide to pay it, you end up having the lens that allows you to see, well, if I sign up for all of this stuff, by the time you factor in taxes, I have 92% of my income allocated. Well, it's very difficult for me then to build any kind of wealth with the 8% of income remaining. And that lens tends to make that super clear for whatever reason. When looking at a paycheck view, for most folks, that doesn't click.
I think we've talked a lot about it, but we haven't said the word, or I haven't heard it, a budget. You have to set yourself a budget. That's super important. And do you have any resources you would recommend for people as far as like, for me, it's just a spiral notebook that I've written in
Love
the
it.
last many years, but I'm sure there's something that's online.
Oh,
So
awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah, really, the thing is, you have to get it done one way or another. But I think if you do it in a specific way, it's a needle mover versus a treading water event. So there are apps, of course. The free version of Every Dollar is one. YNAB is another common one. That one has a nominal fee, but you can use Excel, you can use pen and paper. Any of those things will get the job done. But if all you're doing is tracking cash in, cash out, you can be a diligent budgeter for a decade and not have any change in your net worth. And so the system I normally recommend, it's free, it's inside our community, you can download it. It's a template that is designed to focus on the percent of income that's going to financial progress. And I define your progress dollars as additional debt payments, not minimums, money going to emergency reserves or cash reserves to be used to invest. So, like if you're buying a rental property, not a sinking fund for your vacation or something like that, or an investment. And then the way that I have the template set up, it's actually in Excel. It's very easy at one glance to see if your cash in, cash out is allowing adequate financial progress. I usually recommend this system to most people to start. And then if you want to go to an app or something, you can. But it's very easy to use like a budgeting app. Think that things are going really well and you look up and, a few years your net worth hasn't changed at all. If you use the template, it's very difficult for that to happen because you can very easily look at it and say, wow, 3% of my income went to making financial progress. Well, of course, the net worth needle won't move over the next year. And because of the visualization of it, it does push you towards continuing to allocate more money into that progress side. And that's ultimately what moves the needle.
Let's talk some about investing. Let's talk about it from the standpoint of, say, Miles, who is earlier in the career, Chuck mid-career, and me in the twilight. How do you go about making decisions for what am I going to invest in? What percentages am I going to allocate to fixed income, to stocks, to, real estate, whatever?
Good question. We'll start with you don't decide it during war times. And so if you're using our, S&P 500 losses of 9% in the last month to say what your asset allocation should be, not the best move. Decide this during peace times and have it on paper. And if you have a partner that you do money with, agree upon it together. Of course, the asset allocation you have will shift dramatically based upon your age. And so for someone that's a relatively new medical professional, late 20s, early 30s, you're going to have a very aggressive allocation. And for some people, that's even like 90% equities, 10% bonds. There's an old adage, own your wage and bond or own your age in bonds. It's kind of outdated and honestly far more conservative than most people are. There is also some data showing that like a 90-10 portfolio outperformed an 100% equity portfolio over multiple decades. So, maybe somewhere in that land for somebody who's really young and getting started. And then over time, you're going to shift that to something more conservative. And so by the time you exit and you're living on assets, there's common portfolios, right? There's a 60-40, there's a 50-50 that most people would land at. Now, what that looks like is going to be different by, each person's total net worth and risk tolerance, et cetera. But you're spending those wealth building years slowly transitioning from this very aggressive portfolio to this not so aggressive portfolio. And the main reason is the time horizon you have to overcome market loss. If you sustain 50% market loss, then that in turn takes an 100% gain to get back, right? If you had $100 and you lose 50% of it, you have $50. Well, now to get back to $100 from $50, you have to have an 100% return. And so you have to have time for the market to recover. And if you don't, because you need to live off assets next year, then you can't be in a 90% equities portfolio. And so there's this slow kind of gradual shift that happens over time. Now, how real estate fits in is a little bit more nuanced than that. As a real estate investor myself, I feel pretty passionately that you have to tread lightly and make sure you cap your downside before you move into that space. And so while diversification into that asset class can be a really cool way to build wealth, create cash flow, save money on taxes, it's very rarely an appropriate plan for like a brand new clinician simply because you don't have the adequate cash reserves to move in comfortably. Well, first, you, of course, need to have no high interest debt. You need to have your own emergency reserves covered 6 to 12 months, separate from a down payment for the property. You have to have the ability to afford the administrative stuff that goes with it. That may include asset protection attorneys to create entities for you. That should include a CPA who can help you maximize the tax savings. And then you need to have cash reserves for the property separate from your personal cash reserves. And again, all that's in addition to the down payment. And so it's very hard to move into even a small multifamily without, I would say, at least $100,000 in cash or cash reserves. And it's really hard to move into a short-term rental without more than that. Probably 150, maybe even 200, depending on the level of short-term rental you want to buy, what the staging will cost. And so while I wouldn't say, oh, there's a specific age where real estate's appropriate or not appropriate, it's hard to position yourself to be adequately prepared to move into that asset class until you're not brand new in your financial journey. If you happen to someone give you a couple $100,000, maybe you could, but you do have to position yourself for that. So I would probably piece that in somewhere in the middle. They're usually in practice at least, 3 to 5 years before making that move.
Listeners, tune in next week where we continue our discussion with Kristin Burton talking about finance and retirement and other strategies, how to manage your income. We are having our annual meeting in Las Vegas from September the 1st to the 5th. It's called Ortho on the Strip, and we would love to see you there.